Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Stover. I'm the Executive Director of Allens Lane Art Show. Actually, I'm the Executive Director of Allens Lane Art Center. Welcome to ArtShow. I have with me today Richard Metz. Thank you very much for coming here today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Before we begin, just a few things about some house cleaning. I want to mention to people out there that we do take precautions for COVID, obviously. We have open windows, we have fans, we have air filters 6 feet across. You have your medicinal hand lotion, and the gin and tonic also helps. So we do a lot to prepare to make sure that we're all safe. On your screen, you will see either at the top or the bottom, there is a chat feature. If you click on that button, you can send questions to Richard at the end of this conversation. I will remind you later on. So you just click on the chat feature and submit your questions to host. And that way we'll be able to have your questions. Lastly, I want to say a big thank you to all of you who donated to the center. It's especially wonderful at this particular time of the year, and during COVID, the center really thanks you. So thank you for all those people who donated. So Richard, thank you again for coming by today.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.
It's exciting.
It was a couple of years ago that you had a show here in this gallery.
Yeah.
That was really well received. We had a really wonderful, fun time.
It was, yeah.
I would like to start at the beginning, where I usually always do.
Okay.
How did your life in the arts begin?
So I don't know exactly. I was thinking about this before. I'd like to hedge around questions.
Sure.
So I don't know exactly what you mean by begin.
Well, did you do art in school? Did you go to?
Yeah, like in other words, I was explaining this really good elementary art teacher, Armand Mednick at Oak Lane Day School, and me spending time in that, kind of very kind of earthen kind of place, making clay sculptures, and just getting very excited about it. And then through part of public school, a lot of that disappeared.
Okay.
Through like elementary and through the later elementary and junior high, and then somewhere around high school, I just kind of got into it. My uncle is a fairly successful painter, Frank Metz. One of my father's best friends was Larry Day, the Philadelphia painter. So he would come over. Yeah, and they would listen to classical music. And I think at a certain point around 10th or 11th grade, I realized, especially early in 11th grade, this was my life. Mm-hmm. This was going to be my thing.
Well, we need to talk about Larry Day. He's a big favorite of mine. I showed his work when I was at the Art Alliance years ago.
Wonderful. Yeah, he was just a terrific person. And I think he kind of, like, no parent really wants their kid to go into the arts. Michelangelo's father didn't want him to go into the arts. But he was able to somehow allay my father's fears that life was going to be challenging no matter what, and he might as well do something he enjoys.
Rewarding.
Yeah. So that was helpful.
Did you go to college for arts?
Yeah. I went to Tyler School of Art. I actually disliked my high school so much that I went a year early. They had a program where if you were reasonably good, you could apply to Tyler. And so instead of 12th grade, I combined 12th grade and my last year of high school.
Okay.
Which is ironic because I ended up going back and teaching at my high school for 30 years, the class that I missed.
Right.
It's also strange.
Okay.
But yeah, I love Tyler. I finally found I was like a home there.
Right.
In 1977 or whatever. And yeah, it was terrific. I kind of jumped into the whole thing and did the whole Tyler in Rome program, which was terrific. And
okay, so you went to Rome for a year. That was a year.
Yeah. And that was just amazing.
I ask because sometimes artists slide into the arts. They've either always known it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have a flashpoint, like, no, I want to be an artist. And all changes for them. So you're definitely the slider. It sounds like that you sort of went into that?
Well, I mean, it seemed like I knew what I wanted to do. And there, you know, at other times I was really interested in math, or I was really interested in science, but at a certain point in high school, I realized this is the only thing I really wanted to do.
So you ended up teaching for years. For how long?
For 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But all that time you were still producing work, your own work?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, before that, I mean, I didn't start teaching. I mean, I actually worked here before that, you know. Right. So, you know, I kind of bounced around a bit. I did a lot of political stuff right after college. I was an organizer. We was part of the anarchist study group in the you know, in the 80s, and was teaching here. I guess it was probably 85, 86, teaching in the after school program. Okay. Right. And loved it because my friend was the director, Carl was the director, and I said, boy, this is better. I was also waiting, you know, working at a restaurant. I said, this is better than that. And, you know, and so I kind of went on to get a teaching certificate and taught in Philadelphia for 2 years, and then taught at Abington High School for 29 years.
A little bit of everywhere.
Yeah, but yeah. So I've always been doing my own work, but it's changed a lot. It's you know, it's been challenged a lot by some of my like political ideas, and it's been challenged by just different experiences that I've had. So it's changed and grown.
So I've had the opportunity to go to a lot of different artists' studios to meet them, to look at their work. So I had a chance to get, and you're one of the few artists that has the studio in your home.
Right. Now, yeah.
Has it always been that way? Or
no.
Okay.
No. I guess there have been different times where I had a studio twice at the Sedgwick building, you know, above the theater.
All right. And
that was a terrific studio.
Do you prefer it at home or do you prefer it out?
Well, that's a hard call. There's things you know, I mean, I think I got more work done when I was out, but it's easier just to go right downstairs and get to work.
Yeah. That does help, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and the other issue is that, especially after graduate school, you know, there was this sense of like, don't get so comfortable in your studio, get out of your studio. And so so a lot of my work is outside, you know, not a lot of it, but some of it is outside with these tree paintings and things like that I'm doing. So it's not quite, it is studio bound, but not quite so much.
Well, that's the perfect segue, because what I really wanted to get in and what I was most excited to talk to you about is materials.
Right?
So
materials.
You're my materials guy.
I love materials. Yeah.
So let's talk materials. I first knew you and was introduced to your work as a printmaker.
Yeah.
So you had been doing printmaking for a long time, and that's what I had known. And at that time you hadn't, I don't think you had started yet into working into the outside. Right. So so let's start at printmaking. What got you into printmaking to begin with?
Well, I mean, I had done printmaking in high school, woodcuts, and I just thought it was, I just loved the process. And, you know, I just had such a strong affiliation through my whole life with the German Expressionists and those real, just how to do so much with such simple means as a woodcut. I think at a certain point I said, I really want work that can, so it's like many printmakers, that I can sell for very little and can reach a lot of people. I want it to be a little less precious. And I like the idea that you make editions, and especially with some of the things I did for this show, like each one was a little different. I could be hand painting them, I could be playing with the colors. And there's just something about wood. I did some things with wood and then things with linoleum, but I liked that there was a sense of editions, you know, the sense of the paper, and it wasn't machine made. I could, because of very self-reliance issues, especially with materials, that I could, with my tools, cut the wood, print it, you know, and it was, I wasn't using, even though I use a lot of digital stuff in terms of how to put your work out there in the world, I like those simple means.
Yeah. It's funny that you should mention the German expressionists, because, you know, as soon as you said that, I was like, ah, yeah, that sort of clued me in.
Yeah.
But you have what I have always enjoyed, that the sort of the spin of the surreal that you mix in with it, that isn't really found.
No,
it was more, you know, blocky shapes. And you really dive into the subconscious. I mean, it's clear as a bell in some of the figures that you made. And before I continue on, because sometimes people have a tough time, I want to encourage everybody out there to please visit Richard's website. It's Mr. Metz.com.
MrMetz.com. That's right.
And you'll get a real sense of the kind of work that he does. It's great that you can have so many images on it.
Yeah.
And one of the sections I would love for you to look at is the trees section.
Right.
So tell me the origin of the trees. What made you first describe what it is that you do?
So what I do is I use natural pigments and eggs, and I create images directly on trees. It happened in a very circuitous way, where a teacher of mine, this wonderful teacher, Abby Sean, when I was up in Maine doing graduate work, she gave me some powdered pigments. And I don't know why. I mean, she's just an interesting person. She used powdered pigments and eggs. And I had this studio in Maine, and you know, in Yarmouth, and it looked over this little river. And at a certain point, I had these images, and I said, you know, I'm going to go paint them outside. And like ideas come to you. I did it, and then nothing happened with it, because that was in 2000. Nothing happened until maybe 8 years later, when I said, you know, I want to do this. And I just started going into the woods secretly, you know, and just kind of working and taking photographs, going to places where nobody could see me. And then there was and I eventually showed them to this curator at Abington Arts Center, and she said, well, I'm going to make you legal. And so she gave me a show where I was working in the woods there, and then I started doing ridiculous residencies. Like I would, you know, that made no sense financially. Somebody's going to give me $600, and I was going to fly out to Seattle, you know, and back, and pay for you know, all this stuff. But it was such a good experience. So I've been to Seattle, and then there was the Rensing Center in South Carolina, and up to Maine College of Art had a place in Nova Scotia, and I would do these kind of woods things. And sometimes it started out just responding to the shapes of the trees.
So they're figures that you're usually putting on these trees, and they're imaginary figures.
There are
animals, or imaginary animals, or almost fairy-like creatures, or a wide variety.
Sometimes. In general, they were. But they've become more like, especially like in South Carolina, I spent time sort of researching the area and the local stories, the Native American stories, the other stories of that particular area, and then put those on the trees. Whereas for the recent thing I did at Aubrey Arboretum just this past summer, I had wanted to do something with birds, and they actually suggested, well, why don't you do a bird scavenger hunt? And so I did something like 30 or 33 birds or whatever. So
how did you get them to stay put?
Well, they would sort of fly around. That's right. But that was so that was a little more realistic or simplistic. But the part that I loved about the trees, because before that, in the interim, I actually went out into the woods and found huge pieces of bark and scraped them and put alcohol and put shellac on them, and then glued them to canvas and painted on that, because I said, oh, that surface, that Dubuffet surface, you know, it was just so beautiful.
So you're bringing back Art Brut.
Well, I was absolutely. I mean,
I never went away.
Well, I love him more than anything, but I was also very much, for some reason, maybe it was I think it was partly having children and reading to them. I got very interested in Dr. Seuss,
Right.
and you know, very interested in Native American stuff. So it's sort of combined. And I know when we were in Nova Scotia, we saw this guy, and he would carve figures right on the trees.
Right.
You know, and that was so there was. And part of it is just that I want people to go out in nature. It's the environmental aesthetic. And I think it's also a critique of my other work, which has lasted forever, whatever. It's this idea of, it's a critique of consumer culture in the sense that we have so much stuff.
Right.
And I like the idea that the artwork would sort of be born, live, and then fade away. And that was kind of an elegant sort of thing. And so then a lot of it was just, for me, it's so much fun as like an art geek to be researching Renaissance paint formulas and reading all these old books and talking to people at R&F Pigments in Kingston and all these other people and getting these books and like, how do I do that? Or, you know, all these other kinds of, like what pigments work here and that sort of thing, and what are natural pigments and what are the first synthetic pigments and should I use those, and then just finding out like Kremer Pigments in New York City has like, it's like a candy store with all these natural pigments, and then they have this stuff that you can grind up to make the pigments. So I kind of, half of my life is a fantasy world, but I imagine myself as this alchemist, you know, grinding my pigments in my studio and you know, kind of what happens if I mix it with shellac, or what happens with eggs, or what happens with gum arabic? How do I make gum arabic? You know, and so there's all that love of the materials, just as you're saying.
Well, you know, I think one of the things that struck me looking at them, especially through your website, because you have so many up there, what I like seeing was the evolution of them, right? So it wasn't just like you did a few of them, and I can see that from your first ones to the last ones, your imagery has changed, your technique has changed. It's become a lot, I don't want to say tighter, but the imagery,
it definitely has
if you want
to,
And now even when I see your other works, I can see how you had to go through that to get to things like this, that they're all sort of connected. I really love that.
And that's good that you see that, because in the different works I do, they are all connected. And that's, and yes, it certainly has changed, that I have become a little more illustrative. You know, preferring smoother trees now. I can really do what I want.
Well, let me ask you about the work itself. Like, do you plan out, how much planning do you do as opposed to sort of experimentation? Like if you see, are you doing tree by tree? Are you thinking I'll do a series of them because it's thematic? I'm seeing through them. So
I used to do tree by tree, and now, especially with the thing at Aubrey, it was like, this is going to be a complete piece, and it might not even be done. Like the piece I did 2 years ago at Aubrey, which was the moth menagerie of these moth people. Right. You know, and you know, it's not. I was fascinated by the idea that there's a museum in West Virginia, the Mothman Museum. Right. Okay. But also the connection with fairies and the connection with these kind of spirit-like creatures. That I planned as a whole area, and my wife actually helped me because she's more sculpturally, spatially oriented. And so that was planned as an area, but the one I did a few years ago up in like Acton, Massachusetts, even though it was a circular area, it bounced around a bit. And it was something that I kind of, even though I loved the painting I did there, almost more than anything, it didn't work as a whole group. I started doing some birds, and then I did frogs and bears, and I was kind of dealing with the area. It was right near like Walden and Thirth, but it didn't stick together as much as I wanted it to. So I kind of made up my mind. Let's think about the whole space a little bit more.
You're not. I get a sense that you're not done doing the tree work.
No,
you're hitting your stride almost. It sounds like.
Probably.
Okay.
Probably. I mean, I realized that everything is up for grabs,
Yeah.
you know, like, because I'll apply to a number of residencies and I may get none, I may get some.
Yeah.
As I said, I was supposed to go back to this place in East Hampton, Massachusetts, this Orchard, which has an art in the orchard thing. But this year was canceled because of COVID.
Right.
So I hope I'll go there next year. You know, it's nice because they provide a place to stay for a week. In each place I make my arrangements, like you have to provide a place for me to stay for 2 weeks. And you know, because they're not really paying me much except supplies.
Right.
So
what I want to know is, obviously we live so close to Fairmount Park. I'm assuming there's some of these in Fairmount Park.
There aren't.
There aren't?
No, I have made overtures into Fairmount Park and I've been kind of rebuffed or ignored.
Because I was going to ask you for the secret map.
Ah, the secret map. Yes.
No,
I don't. I haven't yet. I would love to do that.
Maybe we could get, because we back up to Fairmount here, so we could let's talk. We'll talk about
that. Yes.
I want to know, so you've been making art for years, decades.
Yeah.
Right? I'd like to talk a little bit about, what do you feel is the difference between, say, the works that you were making 20 years ago as opposed to now? You know, do you still get, is it that same feeling that you approach? Do you find it harder, easier? What's the big difference?
Well, things changed a lot with graduate school in 1998 to 2000, because the whole introduction of a kind of feminist postmodernism was sort of inherent critique of the work I'd done before. And it led me to experiment and open up things. I was painting on rocks and bricks and, you know, it's kind of, and it led me to think of art as a little more subversive activity. It led me to think about class and race and gender issues, which none of that I had done before. I was really just, like paintings of the city, paintings of anything that I loved, paintings of landscapes, being outside for hours, doing surreal, huge heads, and mixing together brains and dealing with Jungian psychology. But I wasn't thinking necessarily about the artwork and its significance to the public. In a kind of a physical sense. So my work has changed a lot since, from 2000 onward, and even that early stuff, like when you're in grad school, that's very almost dogmatic kind of work in some ways. So I've kind of loosened up a lot. I decided with men's suits, you know, I painted all these strange characters.
I did not yet talk about this yet, but
you know, so that was sort of just this idea that kind of begins as a costume party, you know, and then just kind of continues. But so I'm more experimental now. I'm not. Right now I'm working on, I'm going to do a book of drawings. So I'm not limiting myself. Whereas before it was oil paint, it was canvas, and I loved oil paint and canvas. I love the smell of oil paint. I taught oil paint for 30 years. I mean, it's beautiful. And I've read so much about it, and I love art history. So I love all of that. But, you know, now painting is a way, or art making is a way of studying and learning about things as much as it is expressing things.
Well, I can see it in your work. You know, what I'm attracted to is looking at sort of your oeuvre. I can see the evolution of your work. I can see how one thing leads to another. For me, one of the things that actually ties a lot of your work together is actually your palette. You tend to use a lot of earth tones, a lot of muted colors, but it's the combination of those colors that I've always been attracted to that you, and I can see how working on the trees is that natural, it's the progression, it's the tree color that you're sort of pulling forth. And I can see it in other pieces. So before I continue, I just want to encourage everybody that if anybody has any questions, just a reminder to please use the chat feature to send your questions to us. So with that, I'd love to turn and ask about, what did you bring us today? What is this piece?
Well, this is Raven's Land.
What's the material made out of?
The material, again, trying to be mostly as natural as possible, is I started out with like an oil-based clay and made a sculpture, and then I covered that with like oil, and then I put strips of Paris craft, like plaster gauze on top of it. So there's a number of those, and then it's painted with gouache and yeah, mostly gouache there, and then shellac. After that, there's a stone in there that nobody would see.
This is a very unique piece in your
Well, no, I mean, I have a series of 10
okay.
of crows and ravens.
Did you start out knowing like I'm going to make 10 of these,
no,
or just
no.
one was like I don't have enough, like I need to make 9 more?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I may make more.
Yeah.
But I really I love this idea that because even with the tree paintings, it's still a relatively, even though it's curved now, and the latest things I'm working all around the tree. Right. This was like taking the painting off, like now I'm painting behind the painting.
Shape to it.
Oh yeah. You know, I'm painting behind the painting. Like, what am I doing? Painting behind the painting. That's crazy.
Well, even the shadow that bounces back off of it.
So I love this idea that it's kind of a solid thing. It's a sculpture and a painting. It's kind of a relief painting. This is the idea here was to make it almost like you're looking down on the land. Right. Like this is trees looking down on the land. But yeah, it's the other ones are like whole crows, but I wanted to kind of focus in on or ravens.
Well, it's a little difficult for people to see at home, and I'm hoping that we can get you to put photos of this maybe on social media or your website or something like that, so people can kind of see stuff.
Well, this is definitely on there.
Oh, fantastic! That's on there.
Yeah.
But immediately, you know, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about the early Dubuffet that you had talked about, and this sort of rich texture that's sort of built up, and it's eye candy, really.
I love that, and you know, and I've looked at his things. You know, he's using like cement, or he's using plaster, or he's building up things and inscribing into them. And even his imagery is so much fun, and you know.
I would imagine that you're probably the type of artist that you probably look at a lot of artwork, a lot of other artists' work, and all that. So Dubuffet was probably one of your go-tos.
Oh yeah.
Do you have any others that you are, or even people that you're currently looking at that are just fascinating to you?
Well, let's see, who am I currently looking at? There's always new people, and there's a lot of kind of people on Instagram, but
because we're awash with
art
and images anymore.
I know. So I was just trying to figure out which art books we're trying to get rid of things. So I was trying which art books to keep. You know? So of course there's expressionism books. Right. You know, the Jenny Saville book. Right. I love her stuff. You know, there's of course like some Dr. Seuss books. Right. As I said, Native American Kachina dolls and Native American masks.
I love the eclecticness.
Oh yeah, Lucian Freud.
Right.
I love, you know.
The Freud style. I can see the heavy, the painter's painter. Right. Knowing this kind of stuff really helps me to dive into your works. I think it gives me another clue as to what you're thinking, and of course I do see all the mental gymnastics that you're doing within these, and even the hidden things that you're talking about. I mean, just what this particular bird means as an icon is huge, right? So
and so I've been doing more of that reading and writing now about ravens and crows and that kind of thing. But what's so funny about this is the limited palette. Like in other words, now this is a little more open because I'm using gouache, but even for the tree paintings and other things, like with oil paint, you have every color in the world.
Right.
But I like this idea of narrowing it down. Like, I can't use a really, like I can use a little ultramarine, but mostly it's this indigo, or I can't use this bright yellow, I'm using turmeric, or I'm using yellow ore or red ore. There's no bright red, and I just found lac, which is some bug secretion, you know. Wow, but it's so fugitive. You know, it fades away, you know, so quickly. So there's the materials, and I like being connected to the materials. I know what this is. I know where it comes from. I know what country it comes from, and this green ore, and I like having the limitations, which is interesting.
Yeah, I can see that. It does help focus. So. I have a couple of questions from our audience, so we can't get to all of them, but I've got a few. But before I ask you the question, I would like you to put your question mask on, please.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay. Have to.
Careful, don't forget you have a microphone attached to you.
Okay.
Hold on for a second there, folks.
Okay.
Because I'm actually thinking I may now have all of our artists bring some sort of a question mask. So I think it'll be helpful in understanding.
I think this is important.
Right, yeah, it's very important. Okay, so first question for the, well, first I have to ask, does the mask have a name to it?
It is the Kingfisher mask.
The Kingfisher mask, okay. Should I address you as Kingfisher?
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, Mr. Kingfisher. Can you elaborate on your use of eggs with pigments?
Yes, sure. What you do with that is, at first I was using the whole egg and diluting it about 5 times. Now, because I want it to be a little more solid, you have to break the egg and just use the yolk. So you have to pass it back and forth and get rid of all the white. And then you can just, you know, I have my backpack full of pigments, and I just pour a little, you know, and I mix water with the egg about 5 to 10 to 1, and then just pour the egg mixture in, pour the powder in, mix it up. And that's that. It's, you know, I mean, it will harden, you know, as egg temper paintings, the Renaissance, and, you know, Andrew Wyeth and all these people have used, but there's a lot, it's, you know, it's fluid to the extent that you can clean it up very easily. And it will smell after a while.
Richard, actually, Mr. Kingfisher, can you speak to why crows?
Can I speak to why crows? Yes. I mean, I've always been surrounded by crows growing up here. I think they're such intelligent birds, but recently I've been so interested in the idea that crows eat the dead. And they're like a serious bird. We live in like serious times. And I think I got into this from my sort of apocalyptic view of the future. And I thought the crows are portending this dark future. And I like that they're also the spiritual carriers of the souls to, you know, they go up, they carry the souls up. And they're just so intelligent, and they are sort of communal, and they're mischievous. And I've just been kind of learning more and more about them. And I think I also like the idea that they're just black. And there's just something so beautiful. Sometimes they're iridescent.
Right.
And they just, you know, sometimes I've now been listening to those calls. In some way, I mean, before that, I was sort of into these kingfishers. And so, you know, because I was painting at Morris Arboretum, and there was a kingfisher that would fly around. Sometimes what I'm interested in is a vehicle to explore more things, like those, the work that I had here were magnifications of seed heads. So I was really studying like natural forms. And it, you know, it almost didn't matter at a certain point. Formally, they're just these beautiful things. But I was also studying, this is what you can eat if you're starving, or that sort of thing. You know?
One thing leads to another,
absolutely.
That's for sure. Can you speak on your love of writing character development in relation to your prints and paintings? How one reflects to the other.
Character development.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is kind of a trickier one. I mean, I have, I did, I guess, a few years ago, I kind of dove into doing about a year and a half of radio drama because I've been writing fiction all along.
Okay.
And, but never so seriously. I started maybe 5 or 6 years ago taking fiction writing classes. And I loved the idea that fiction could do what painting couldn't. It could tell these stories in these interior voices.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that. I think character development is just time. Like I've drawn and painted these Kingfisher characters, and I kind of get more and more into them. And part of using the mask is you want to get ultimately into them. Like in my graduate work, it was Sam I Am and the Fox and the Mouse. And I was drawing them and painting them, and they became icons of feminism and patriarchy. And then I actually had people dress up in them. And then they were interrogating me in a performance, you know. So character development is just something that happens as I go further into something. I want to know more about it. It seems to kind of develop organically.
Did the crows end up in the writing? Is that?
The crows are slowly developing. In other words, I'm going to be doing a book of these drawings, and I'm writing a little bit about them. So one of the drawings is about Van Gogh's crows. You know, and one is about the crow that, you know, circled around Moscow when the Tsar was dying or something. So there's a narrative that's happening. And I'm enjoying that because I like writing. I wrote some things for a show up in Ambler at this at Cellini's gallery, almost poems of these kind of strange paintings. So I like combining the two.
I'm getting a sense that, you know, what I've seen of yours online is just the tip of the iceberg.
There's a lot of other stuff.
There's a lot of work, so I encourage that. But speaking of online, I always want to encourage everybody out there to please go to Richard's website, take a look at his work, and then most importantly, reach out, contact the artists, ask questions, see if you can make your way into their studio with a visit, buy work from the artists directly, and just support artists. So I really want to encourage everybody to do that. And
absolutely.
Is this piece also on online?
This is not yet. This was actually.
We can get you to it. If I can't convince you to figure out
this
something
was,
maybe I can trade you for that. That's really a
that's
first time I've interviewed a Kingfisher. So. But I want to thank you very much for coming by today. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I could sit here for hours and just keep going.
I could as well too.
But thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I thank you all for joining us this evening. Thanks again to all of our donors. Really appreciate it. Thank you to Ellen's Lane, our board, directors, and staff. We appreciate all your help. Thank you and have a good evening, and see you next week at ArtShow.